Where does, if you're evaluating ERPs or you're in, let's say you've made the decision on the ERP or you think you know the ERP, but you're evaluating the ERP consultant or the ERP implementer, what will you walk through kind of a lot of steps there of what some questions that you need to ask before you even get to the step of, hey, we're going to move forward with this ERP. What other things would a good ERP implementer in the manufacturing world be able to tell you and advise you on as you're going forward with this process?
Yeah, I think that a lot of what a really good ERP implementer will do is that they'll tell you what you need they'll tell you what you need, not what you want. Okay. I think it's a great, you'll give them what they need, right? At the end of the day. And sometimes like a lot of times when you're buying the system, we see a lot of customers people buy ERPs and then just use the same process. So a lot of times the reason why there's these whole companies whose whole job it is to implement ERPs is because the process isn't like buying an off-the-shelf SaaS app where you just plug it into your process. It's a combination of best practices, like basically process reengineering and software. It's a combination of all those things. And the best consultants are going to identify like when it makes sense to change your process, when it makes sense to leave things alone, and what parts the software needs to cover. And then turning those dials at the right proportions to get you where you need to go. And if you don't have those people, you're just in the dark. You're assuming like you're either going to try to change too many things at once, change all your processes, or you're going to try to, well, we bought the thing. I need to use all these modules that I bought, and so you get into this kind of, you're turning the dials at the wrong ratios. And
Right.
so the idea of the implementer should be able to tell you, hey, I got you. Turn this one to 5, turn this one to 2, turn this one to 3. You're good.
Right.
And then over time, we can change those dials.
Honing in on some of the practical steps. Let's go a little bit deeper.
Mhm.
You've made that ERP selection. You feel pretty good about your implementer, but your implementer is bringing in other third parties or other things like CADTalk, other integrations that you're looking at. When do you plan that integration strategy? What does that look like? When is it best to do those integrations?
I think it's a good question because it's not like we would say, let's just kind of walk through a scenario. I think to me, it's like if you give a scenario, it makes it a lot
Mm.
simpler to kind of like get your mind around because everything else seems conceptual. But like, say I'm a consultant that I'm talking to you about, and you're like, hey, what you know what you want. You're like, I want finite scheduling, and I'm like, cool, all right. So you want finite scheduling. How are your bills look? Oh, they're pretty good. How's your routings? Your run times? Okay, like like you realize these things have to be solid in order to get that benefit. Okay. Um, and then you're like, so that during that decision point, they're basing everything on the fact that like, what's their current reality? Someone has to figure that out and someone has to do that. Okay. So all decisions are made with basic assumptions about the reality at the time they make the decision. So you think about like, well, the current reality is it's all being done manually. There's people there. I only have one person who does it. Like all of these things that matter. And they might decide, I don't know, like maybe we don't do the finance scheduling right now because I'm looking at the environment the way it is. But if I consider other changes to the environment, different new tools, other technologies, other things like that, and I consider those at the same time, and I put that into my assumptions during that design, I come up with a completely different outcome. Does that make sense? So like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's why the earlier the better. It's like you may decide still not to do it, based on other scenarios, cost, risk, all the other kinds of things. Because there is a risk there. You have to implement something else. There's all of that, right? But you can at least consider the path with a different environment. What does this look like if it's being automated or it's more consistent or I don't have to put a process in place. All these different things you can look at, you can model that different scenario. But you can't do that unless you at least think about the fact that the environment would be different in the future with different tools.
And I think as you evaluate that and looking at what all of those different things play into, so you're evaluating, potential big process changes and look at that. I think there is this, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, this idea that it needs to be a big bang, that
Mm.
ERP implementation needs to be something that happens and you implement and you move forward and you keep going. But one, that's almost never the case.
Hmm.
Two, it's probably not a good idea. And three, taking that crawl, walk, run approach, which you will hear us reference a lot, you'll hear other ERP implementers who we work with reference a lot, is going to pay dividends going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that like, and that's a good point. It's like, if you have clarity on what the parts that are important and what are the things that drive what would have to be true for those things to happen, then it really sets the order of operations for you in the whole equation of the ERP implementation. To me, it's just like so yeah, you might decide that like I really want to do this, I really want this really cool feature, or we have these vendor portals, and that might be the most important thing to you. I need vendor portals, suppliers or supplier portals, all this kind of stuff. That's the constraint of your business that you're trying to solve. And you don't really have too much issues with your scheduling and stuff like that, then probably don't buy CAD Talk. Don't do that. Like it doesn't matter. Like it's not going to drive it's not the limiting factor. It's not the constraint in your business. But I think about like most manufacturers and how ERP works. It all drives from that bill of material, right? So it's like the chances that that is a critical piece in of the things that you might want to use in an ERP being a critical piece of it is a very high likelihood of that. So like, then maybe it's not something you delay. That's part of that process. If it is, then yeah, then you always have the ability to improve things as you go, but you have to know what the parts that matter. And it's a priority list at that point. Yeah.
So let's keep going on that path forward. We're kind of walking it here. And I like
Mhm.
where we're walking along this path of going from evaluating an ERP to evaluating the implementer to evaluating the add-ins. You've made the decision now. You're ready to move forward. What does that process then look like? What can you expect in terms of return? What's the timeline like in terms of, let's say you're moving forward with an ERP implementation and you are going to, you're going to work with CAD Talk or another integration. I guess you can only really speak to CAD Talk in this case, but what does that then look like for you in terms of the implementation of that and what you can expect, how that can change what you're looking at for your business, and what changes can you expect to encounter as you're going through that?
Yeah, a lot of implementations start off with kind of what they call modeling, right? Well, sometimes they start with training in order so you understand even what the thing is that you're using, and then they go through business process modeling. Like, how would I model this given the new tool, right? And then, same thing, you'd model the same process with CAD Talk, and you make some assumptions about what things would look like, and then you decide, then you build a process around that. So that's kind of how that works. And that process it just depends on like, there's a lot of arguments, there's a lot of debates, there's like a lot of transferring of like context from the company to the consultant and back and forth, understanding that. And the more you have all the parties involved with that, hopefully the easier that transfer is because everybody's on the same page as it goes along. And you also are making a lot of decisions, okay, along the way. And then you locking things in. Once you have the decisions locked in, like your optionality for the future goes down. And we see this a lot. Like customers they'll go down and they'll like implement, like I said, finance scheduling. And they'll be up on it and they'll have made a bunch of decisions about how they structure bills and all this kind of stuff. And then they'll come, this maintaining a bill sucks. Let's get CAD Talk involved and get that down. Then they'll actually say, this is how we need you to put it in place. And we're like, ooh, God, I wish you talked to us in the beginning. That's like not best practice. That's really hard. Like we can do it, but it's just, it's ugly. Then there's a cost to that. Right. And so that's kind of like that process. So like, so you really, that it's kind of a messy process to really, I mean, unfortunately there's no other way to do it. You have to work through all of that and then and then understand all the variables and basically transfer context across everybody's minds. They understand how the future state's going to look and then go forward with that. And that takes time. That's why we always recommend that like ERP implementers do this, and we recommend it too. Is that crawl, walk, run type of is more of a continuous process of implementing an ERP as opposed to a big bang or implementing anything really, because you you want to just nail the parts that matter and then get them stable and then stack the improvements as opposed to like doing everything at once and then increasing the odds of failure.
As we talk about crawl, walk, run, I'm going to leave one more thing and then I'm going to move on to kind of our key takeaways as we wrap up here. If you are looking at this sort of solution and you are figuring all of this out, just if you're listening, there is I think, a fantastic example of crawl, walk, run on our website. If you go to cadtalk.com and go to our case studies, PBC Linear, it's an N4 user, a CAD Talk user, and they have stacked with other tech and didn't start this way, but they had this vision, to your point of vision, that someone would be able to, say, do bearings and linear bearings. And so the idea would be that someone could go on their website, design a product or select a product and make their adjustments, and they'd be able to press submit and a job packet would print on the shop floor and be ready to go. They have achieved that with what they've done. That was not an overnight process. That was a process that took a long time. But to your point, that vision, that's the, if you watch the case study, Chris Kennedy from our team did a fantastic job, went to their manufacturing group in Illinois. They did a fantastic job of telling their story. The first thing you'll hear is Jonathan Schroeder from their team saying 20 years ago, we had this vision. And
Mm.
that I feel like speaks really well to what you talked about with the idea of understanding where we're trying to go with this.
Yeah. It's like you start with the vision and you work backwards and what has to be true for that kind of realization.
And I think it's interesting as we wrap up here, and this is kind of one of my takeaways, and then I want to hear your thoughts. At the end of the day, especially for someone like myself, I'm not an engineer. I have a marketing background. I hear things that, engineers talk about and developers talk about. And, I have learned to not have my eyes glaze over, but it's one of those things where it feels very technical and it feels very unattainable in some ways. Integration feels like a technical project. In the 40 some odd minutes that we have talked today, we haven't talked anything that's been super technical. It's all been about business conversations. It's been about bigger picture things, not IT conversations of how we do this integration. My takeaway is that that's not really the point. It's about, the technical part isn't really the point. That's why we do what we do and we have people who implement. They're there to handle the technical. It's more about you as a business, not like, how do we do this? It's, do we do this? Do we make this decision? Is this right for our business? That's what I feel like the takeaway is for me. I don't know about you.
Yeah. It's the why, right? I mean, it's like, you have a big enough why, the how becomes easy. Right. It's like, that's the reason. It's like, why would we do this? I want a competitive advantage. I want my business to run better. I want to serve my customers better. And I want to do all these things. There's a why. Right. And then it's like, but people can have the why is vision. That's the vision. Right. And then you have to work back from the why to what would have to be true to make that happen. And then that's where all the technical stuff comes in.
Right. Right. And those conversations will happen and there will be technical conversations.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, the decision to move forward isn't most likely hinging on that technical conversation. It's the business part of that and understanding what that can do that
Mhm.
really makes that decision.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Scott, I really enjoyed talking today. Really enjoy being able to go through and walk through just this kind of journey and process and the bigger picture behind what we do. Before we wrap up, I'll do my plugs here, but any final thoughts that you have as we've gone through that you feel like we haven't touched on yet?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered it really well. I think I love the fact that we're elevating the conversation to let's elevate the conversation to why, as opposed to like the kind of, microcosm solutions, because I think the market is smarter now. They're smarter than that. They understand more of the problem. It's like there's actually always a root cause to these things and like why we're doing them, and really getting that, and then just showing how, like, the why behind any given thing and what, where it works, things like that has been really cool conversation, because it obviously takes a little more of a cognitive load to get all that going, but like it's where all the value is.
Absolutely. Well, I will make my plugs now. If you are interested in learning more, diving into this a little bit more, looking at this might be a viable solution for you with CAD Talk, you can visit our website, cadtalk.com. There's resources there. We have places to book a discovery call if you're interested. There's case studies, demo videos, everything that hopefully you would need to be able to at least begin to understand how you'd want to evaluate this decision. Or, if you're looking at, in the ERP space, talk to your implementation partner that you're working with. Chances are they have familiar with CAD Talk as well. We work with a lot of implementation partners, and so they can help you obviously evaluate those solutions and bring us in there as well. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Integrate Intelligently podcast. For CAD Talk CEO Scott Brickler, I'm John Thomas. We will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.